Right.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. So we're going to be doing Turner today. Basically, there is a show that's coming in the fall to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. It's being organized by the Boston Museum, um, one of the museums in Texas, and I can't remember which one it is, and the Tate. The Tate has the largest collection of Turner's work in the world. They actually he bequested his entire studio to the Tate, so they have huge holdings. I'm not sure of the exact numbers that they have there, but they've got a lot of Turners. So okay, we're going to start off with what we're looking at. This painting, Rain, Steam, and Speed, um, and basically it's a symbol of the Industrial Revolution, but it's also um, the the human spirit interacting with nature. Um, this is kind of a thing for Turner. Um, Turner was really um, a generation ahead of his time. He was engaging technology and looking at modernity as subject matter for his art. Um, uh, though it goes to some very interesting things, he really combines the power of nature and the technology. Um, there's a kind of tension in his work, and one of these things is this concept of the sublime. And I was like not quite sure what exactly it meant. I get the idea of it, but I kind of like did a little bit of research on what that would mean. And so what I get out of it is the quality a quality of greatness, of physical, moral, intellectual, metaphysical, aesthetic, or artistic greatness, kind of beyond calculation, beyond measurement, um, uh, kind of beyond imitation, um, the overwhelming forces of nature. Um, so one of the things that he's dealing with is these really elemental forces. All right, let's go here. Okay, so Turner was born in 1775, died in 1851. Um, Oil painter, watercolorist, um, known for his kind of expressive coloration. Um, he did 550 oil paintings in his lifetime, 2,000 watercolors, 30,000 works on paper. So the guy was constantly drawing and trying to get in touch with what was around him. So this early self-portrait from 1799 is kind of an idealized self-portrait, but there you have it. He came from a kind of lower middle class background. His father was a barber, um, and his mother was very troubled. Ended up, you know, um, in in Bedlam Asylum actually during his lifetime. So that was, he was very close to his father though, and his father actually ended up being his studio assistant later on in life as Turner got more and more um, uh, popular and successful. Um, his father moved in with him. Um, Turner um, had a number of affairs. He didn't. He didn't. I'm a little unclear about his married status. He did father two daughters with another woman, and had an affair with his housekeeper. But toward the end of his life, he did meet a woman and live with her as husband and wife, though I don't know if they actually married or not. Doesn't matter. Anyway, um, uh, the main story with him is he was rather pugnacious. He had a really strong Cockney accent, and was rather reclusive, intensely private, um, controversial, shall we say, but a really great painter, and acknowledged in his lifetime as a really great painter. John Ruskin, who was one of the head critics of the time, was very close to Turner and championed his work. So, one of the things that Turner engaged in is this kind of industrial subject matter. And so if you look at this watercolor on the left, it's a Canon foundry. You know, this is not the subject matter that many of his contemporaries were focused on. So there's a certain element of realism, a certain kind of engagement with life as it is, kind of raw and gritty. The one on the left, the Fisherman at Sea. Now, this is one of those things that Turner, throughout his career, continued to come back to. The elemental forces of the sea were very, very, very important to him. It's subject matter that he comes back to again and again. So these are not kind of idealized landscapes. They're not. Let me put it this way: landscape was looked down upon as a lesser art form at this time. There were a few other artists, John Constable and a few other artists, who were elevating landscape, but portraiture and mythic scenes, idealized landscapes, religious themes were still in favor in the 1700s into the early 1800s. But let's see. Okay, and again, you know, on the right, this image is it's a mine shaft. You know, this is not your bucolic picnic on a summer glen, shall we say. This actually, let's see, we're going to go on. Yeah, okay. So these two pieces really kind of presage where Turner is going. The piece on the left is very thickly painted. There's very heavy what we call impasto. So it's very thick paint. It's kind of troweled on there. He uses a palette knife and puts a lot of layers of paint on there, and then uses glazes, which are thinned out paint. Basically, you take the pigment and you mix it with more oil than pigment, and it becomes very translucent, very transparent. So the underpainting, the stuff that's underneath, shows through. And the one on the right, actually, he kept in his studio. Now, this was painted in 1805, and he lived until 1851. Um, so this is a fairly early painting, and he really saw something in it and wanted to keep it. There's this sense of becoming, this sense of possibility. It's kind of abstract and loose and sketchy, but it has this sense of what's possible, what it could become. And that's something, again, this is something that's a theme that we'll see again and again in his work. Now, this is a landscape by John Constable, who was a contemporary of Turner, and it is more typical of what you would see, this kind of bucolic countryside, kids fishing, a mill, off to the side. It's, well painted, but there's not much going on in it, really. It's very tranquil, it's very peaceful, and acceptable. So the other character that plays an important part, somebody who Turner really admired, was Claude Lorraine. Claude Lorraine, this painting was painted in 1639, so this is close to a century before the painting on the left, which is by Turner. Turner really appreciated the layering, the depth, the way things are in the foreground, and these animals are very large, and this whole scene in the foreground, and then you have these layers of things happening off into the distance. This is something which Turner integrated into his painting and really appreciated about Lorraine. The atmospheric quality, as things go off into the distance, they become more, it's something called aerial perspective. You have this sense of it become fading off as it goes off into the distance. And that same thing is true in the Turner. Now, if you look a little bit more closely, though, there's this mine shaft off on the right-hand side of the Turner. And off in the distance, you see that those arched bridges out there. Well, that's a train trestle. So again, you've got this tranquil scene, but it's also that sense of the contemporaneous. It's not an idealized, shepherd out in the fields. Okay. And here's a close-up of that bridge that you saw in the Turner off in the distance. And Turner used watercolor as a way of taking notes, of going out into nature and bringing that back into his studio. I'm going to retract that. All of his oil paintings that I know of were painted in the studio from memory. He would use these watercolors as a way of taking notes out there in nature and bringing that back into the studio. He would catch weather effects. He would catch the way light played off of things. Let me see if I can get a close-up here. Let's see. And zoom in. And I'm going to go over here. And these are the cows that are in this pasture. It's barely readable, but for him, it was enough. It was a note that he needed. Okay. And now we're going to move on to some of the more mature work in his body of work. This is Hannibal crossing, the Alps. Again, it's this image of this storm kind of coming on over these figures, and the sense of this force of nature and man in relationship to that nature, in trying to survive in relationship to it. Okay. Okay. The other thing that I want to go back to is that Hannibal piece is huge. This piece is 58 by 94 inches. So there's a monumentality to the scale of the painting too. Now, moving on to this, that there's this business of turbulence and tranquility in his work. This play between those two different kind of states of being. If you look at the painting on the left, you can see the beginnings of these thick impastos. This is 1801. The watercolor on the right is from later. I think it's from around 1830. But there is this sense of using the paint to really give you that sense of movement. Okay. Shipping in rough waters, again, watercolor. The other thing that he used transparent watercolor, but he also used something called gouache. They call it body color or opaque watercolor. You can see in this pink area, especially in the foreground, that there's some more opacity to the paint. He used that to good advantage. Basically, you'll see more of it as we go along. It gives you a sense of a thicker paint. This is the equivalent of an impasto in watercolor. But in this thing, you can see off in the distance the masts, of the ships in rough water being buffeted around. And here is a group of the watercolors. Now, like I said, he did over 2,000 of them. He used these to record atmosphere, light, weather, motion, with the rhythmic brushwork and washes and color. They're small, so he could get the phenomena down really quickly. But let's see. I'm going to do the zoom in, and you can see in this scene of Rome burning, the opacity of the white paint, how that's kind of painted over the top of the more transparent paint, and even the red in there is more of the gouache, more of the body color. So you can see kind of how he used these things. And of course, this is an imaginary scene. Many of these pieces, let me see. Let's see. This is a beautiful thing. The delicacy of these colors. I had to restrain myself because they have so many at the Tate website. You can download all these things. They're free. They're copyright free and all that. And they have so many of the watercolors. I just went nuts. Had a hard time editing down to what I wanted to do. But you can see how abstract the mark making is in these watercolors. and how much it's about movement, it's about color relationships. Um, they're very quickly painted. In some places, you can actually see his fingerprints and how he used his hand to move the paint around, even. Uh, okay. And all right, this one is The Slave Ship is a story from the actually, it was from the late 1700s. Supposedly, the ship was being overrun by a typhoon, and they were dumping the slaves overboard, and you can see the chains and the feet and the arms of the slaves being dumped overboard and being overwhelmed by the sea. It's a really interesting painting. It's very operatic in a way. It's beautifully painted, this gorgeous color, these lovely impastos in the sky, and this terrible, horrific story that's going along with it. It's very operatic in that the melody is so beautiful, and the libretto is telling of these horrors. So, he was an anti-slaver, as we can see. His this was a very controversial painting at the time when he painted it, 1840. Okay. Now, this is the whole story. The Fighting Temeraire was it was a ship that was involved in a great sea battle with the French during the Napoleonic Wars, and basically Nelson, they were losing the battle, and Nelson's ship was besieged. He was actually mortally wounded in that battle, and the Fighting Temeraire came up through the thicket and actually turned the tide of the battle. So this is a sketch that he did for this painting, and this is basically the burial of the Fighting Temeraire. That by the time we had gotten into the 1830s, the steamship had taken over, basically. And this is a tugboat that's tugging the Temeraire to its burial. And in actuality, Turner put all this rigging up on it and made it look really like it was kind of this ghost ship, but in actuality, the masts had been taken down. It was nothing but a hulk at that point when it was actually being towed out to its dismantling at sea.
Larry?
Yes.
There's a question.
Sure.
Is there a reason that he was so much into painting the high seas?
Well, think about Britain at the time. The Royal Navy and shipping in England made it a superpower, a force to be reckoned with around the world. So the sea was very much part of the nature of Britain. It was very much part of the fabric of their society. So, this was a very fruitful subject matter for him. It really is part of the British nature at the time. The other piece of it is the ocean really had this mystical force for him. It it actually was kind of the essence of this business of the sublime that I was talking about earlier. So that's kind of where the ocean figures into this. It's also wonderful subject matter for abstraction. So he could make the sea do a lot of things, and really the the transience of the weather patterns on the sea gave him a lot of opportunities to play around with those painting devices that he was so fond of.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, and here we are, Burial at Sea. This is again, um,
Oh, Larry, there's another
sure,
comment
sure.
in chat. This one we'll
Yep.
discuss later, but it says this painting was voted Britain's greatest painting in a public poll on BBC in 2004.
The Fighting Temeraire?
I would assume that's what she meant.
Yeah, okay. I can see that. One of the other things that I want to say is you really need to see some of these paintings in person, because the quality of the paint is something that, although I've got some really beautiful reproductions here and they are nice and clear, the quality of how the paint is, I wish I had done some, well, maybe I can. Let me see if I can zoom in and show you, kind of get in there. Well, it gets blurry, but you can get some idea of the thickness of the paint and the use of the impastos. That's something that he was really into. This piece, Burial at Sea, he certainly wasn't afraid of using contrasting tones in his paintings, black and the white, that very powerful dynamic, and the effects that he could get, the smoke, just incredible. He was a great painter, no question about that. And we go from this to the son of Venice, going out to sea. He loved the Venetian light. He made many trips to the continent and painted in Venice. And actually, some of his most fabulous pieces are late in life. His memories of Venice are really beautiful pieces that he worked up as oil paintings from watercolors that he did on the spot. Okay.
Larry?
Yes.
Who bought, oh, wait a minute. Who bought these paintings and financed his craft?
Well, he was, let's put it this way. He was one of the most successful painters of his time. So there were many wealthy collectors that bought his work. In fact, he made the bequest to the Tate before his death, and there are legends of collectors coming to him and saying, I love your work. I want to buy as many as you'll sell me. And he would refuse to sell them paintings because he wanted to keep the body of work together. Now, he was doing well enough so he could do that. He could say, I'm going to survive. So he was confident. He was, I use the word pugnacious. He was quite, quite the character. There's a story of when they did the salons, okay, back then, there was a thing that they called the varnishing party, which would happen the night before or couple of nights before the opening of the salon. And all the artists would come in and they would see where their painting was hung, and they would work on their paintings. They would do a finish varnish, do touch-ups. When they saw where it was placed among other paintings, they might change some things, alter the colors of them, and things like that. Well, there's a story of Turner coming in and seeing Constable painting on one of his paintings, which had this lovely red in it that he really, felt made his painting look a little dull. So he went over to his painting and took a big gob of red and stuck it right into the center of the painting on the water in front of the boats, and painted little horns on it and made a little red devil right there floating in the water. And he walked away. And the other guys were around looking, other artists, is he crazy? What's he doing? Is he going to leave it like that? Is he crazy? He comes back a little while later, after it had a chance to dry a bit, with a rag and a thumb, and wipes off the bottom half of the devil's face, and uses his thumb to alter the shape slightly. And it became this red buoy in the middle of the painting. And that red mark actually touched, there was a red glow that was in the other boats that really didn't shine quite as much. Once he put that red mark in there, those other boats just glowed. I wish I had a copy of that painting here. You can find it. They've got it at the Tate. Anyway, so basically there was a very definite sense of competition among those artists, but there was also a camaraderie there too. So these paintings were painted in 1840, 1845. This presages the Impressionists. If you look at these pieces, you see the brushwork, you see the application of paint, you see the kind of gestural quality that is in the brushwork. And if you go forward another 35 years, you see Impression Sunrise. And Monet, during the early 1870s, during the Franco-Prussian War, came to London and saw Turner and was profoundly affected by him, and really got something that he brought back to his work. And if you think about the impastos that Monet used in his water lilies, it's all there. It was a nod from Turner that gave him the courage, the bravado to go forward with this approach. And he's not afraid of the dark. You can see this texture. You can see, again, like I said, you can see in this the kind of brushwork that's in Monet's paintings, that's in the water lilies that come much later. Okay. And in this piece, Snow, Storm, Steam, Boat Off the Harbor's Mouth, this piece is really, it's a very powerful piece. Look at the vortex, this motion that's in it, this swirl of a composition. Something that he uses a number of times, and we'll be coming to a bunch of those in a couple of minutes. This piece, there's another story of Turner in a crossing across the channel where he had the ship's mates strap him to a mast so that he could actually experience a snowstorm, the gale, the full-on onslaught of nature. So they tied him to a mast, and that is pretty cold and pretty windy. He ended up getting bronchitis from that experiment, but he used that in his work. He wanted to feel the full ferocity of nature. He wanted to be in it. He wanted to be part of it, and wanted to bring that to us. Okay. Now, this is a series that he did. This is toward the end of his life. It's 1843. I believe his father passed in this time, which was a great loss to him. Evening of the Deluge. And basically, there's this swirling business going on here. You can see in here, let me see if I can do a zoom in. You can see these horses and dogs and animals swirling around in here. And off in the distance here on the horizon is more animals going toward what is Noah's Ark? Question mark? And so let's see. Look at this there's this little red mark up in the sky. What's going on there? What, these ghostly forms that are kind of emerging out of this maelstrom. And again, a deluge. So, what is this? A crocodile on the left-hand corner? What do we got here? Is that a giraffe that I see off in the distance? I'm not quite sure, but they're still headed towards that ark, and you see the swarm of birds headed out to the ark. And now we're getting to light and color, Goethe's theory. Goethe was somebody who had, he was a philosopher, theologian, wrote Faust, basically had these color theories that colors coordinated with human emotions, with spiritual states, and Turner embraced those ideas. They're also multisensory. There's this idea that color and sound and all of this stuff merges in human spirit, in the soul of the universe. This is kind of where he's coming from. You can see these souls being swept up in the swirl. And this is the last piece in this particular series. And basically, it's straight into this kind of elemental force of nature and the angels of that realm. The idea of sun and light merging, sun and light as light is Turner's God. Let's put it that way. And so he had a very profound effect on artists at that time, but also artists generations later. And somebody who I've already covered is Albert Pinkham Ryder. And you can see lousy reproduction on the left, but you get the idea, that business of the sea as a kind of birthing place, a kind of turbulent place of the soul. And again, the impastos that Ryder used. Ryder would have seen Turner because he went to England. He did see Turner's work. So he was familiar with that. And now I'm going to keep going. And then there's these really beautiful, tranquil, transcendent, light-filled watercolors and gouaches that Turner did. I can't get enough of these things myself. And these in turn affected contemporary artists such as Rothko. So there's this kind of vast radiant color that Rothko engaged and saw in Turner's work. That kind of sense of this vast expanse of color. And again, these rhythms, the swirl, the motion, the kind of primal quality of that swirling mass of color and that sense of rhythm in nature is something which would echo in somebody like Pollock. So with that, we're going to come to the rainbow at the end.
Larry, we have a question.
Sure.
That I saved for later.
Okay.
Can you speak about his art training?
His art training. Yes, he was a child prodigy. He actually was doing watercolors and architectural paintings when he was 15 years old, and he was selling them out of the front of his father's barbershop. It was from younger than that. He was just a brilliant draftsman and studied at the Royal Academy, excelled there, was very, very well known, was a really well-trained artist. You see all this craziness that he did, all the splatters and splotches and scrapes and mark making that's just wild stuff. But he knew what he was doing with paint. He knew how to put that stuff on. Very well practiced. So did not paint in front of other people very often. There are very few stories of him painting his mature pieces in front of other people. But the ones who did said it was very active. So yeah, he did have a lot of depth as far as his knowledge of what was going on in contemporary art. And as I said, he studied Claude Lorrain. He loved, that Frenchman's art. So yeah, yep. He was a smart guy in his own way, but he actually taught at the Royal Academy Although he never lost his Cockney accent, he was notably hard to understand, obscure, difficult to follow, but he actually taught perspective at the Royal Academy. So that's kind of what I know about that part of him, though the genius comes from where is another question. So, all right. So the genius of Turner is basically one YouTube that is from the Tate, and then there's another one which is a Turner biography that's a bit longer and a bit earlier. And then there's Mr. Turner, which is a film which came out a few years ago. Unfortunately, that is only available for rental at this stage of the game, but kind of worth a watch. It's not the greatest movie I've ever seen about an artist, but it's not bad. And it does give you a sense of this business of the Salon, the Royal Academy, and you do, get to see the imitation of him painting anyway. But the genius of Turner is from the Royal Academy. Now from the Tate, and that it rather focuses more on the Turner's relationship to the modernity, to the Industrial Revolution and all of that, than it does on the brilliance of his painting. As far as I'm concerned, they could have spent a little bit more time on how that paint went on the canvas. But anyway, worth looking at, all those things. So, and again, this show, Turner's Modern World, will be at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts in October. And that's it for this week. Next week,
we're going to be next week. Yeah.
Next week we're going to be going someplace really different. There's a show that's on at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts now that is Jean-Michel Basquiat and graffiti, post-graffiti, the hip hop movement in painting. So, basically, I'm not sure how much I love this stuff, but by next week, I'll know a lot more about it. So I'll share that with you.
You might change your mind.
All right, there you go.
Okay. All right. Thank you all, everybody, for coming, and we hope to see you again next week. Bye, everyone.